by God, great Caesar's ghost.
The Remainder Conjecture, Phantoms of the Laboratory. Author's Preface. I should say right from the outset that I favor a decidedly physicalist approach to the study of consciousness, and that I think those on a spiritual path are better served than they might at first suspect by those championing into-theoretic reductionism, even if such a narrow focus will not resolve the hard question of qualia and why we have self-reflective awareness. In this regard, I am advocating what I call the Remainder Conjecture, which stresses that we exhaust any and all physical explanations first before succumbing to what Paul Kurtz called the transcendental temptation, where we prematurely jump ship and opt for super-mundane explanations for erstwhile mundane events. This, of course, doesn't mean that there cannot be something that transcends our rational understandings, but only that the best way to show evidence for it is to make sure that physics, chemistry, and biology are insufficient to the task. Far too often, in our rush for the transcendental, we accept anecdotes and claims that, given enough careful study and time, don't pass critical scrutiny. In other words, if something is genuinely beyond science's reach, it will invariably show up as a remainder. But if we are not skeptical enough, we can easily be duped and mistakenly confuse a sleight-of-hand magician's trick as a miracle. My own hunch is that the most fruitful avenue for the scientific study of awareness is to fully exhaust a physical explanation of it first. This does not mean, of course, that such an endeavor will be successful or that consciousness is merely the result of a neural net, but only that if our efforts fail, we will be left with a most interesting remainder, which in itself will be highly instructive about the nature of awareness. More precisely, unless we fully option a materialist approach, we run the very real risk of prematurely optioning something as spiritual when, in fact, given better instrumentation and technical prowess, it may well have been the result of subtle neuronal discharges. The good news in advocating this conciliant approach is that if our self-reflective consciousness is ultimately non-physical, then our science will end up driving itself to the very brink of an epistemological cul-de-sac, and in the process reveal that which cannot be explained away. The materialist agenda, I suggest, should be fully embraced, even by those most engaged in a spiritual quest, since it is, ironically, the surest pathway to discover that which is immune to our rationalist inspections. What follows is a narrative that showcases this principle, an investigation into 5 paranormal phenomena by a scientist who remains steadfastly committed to scientific rigor. What happens when we peel back layer after layer of natural explanation only to find a possible remainder that startles the scientific world? Chapter 1. A Summons to the Institute. Dr. Leonard, Len. Mortimer paced around the large, oval wooden desk that graced the center of his office at the Westbridge Neuroscience and Consciousness Institute. His polished shoes clacked on the faux marble flooring. He thought back to the labyrinth of corridors he had walked through earlier in the morning, noticing how his reflection on the polished walls seemed more like a stranger watching him than his own image. Len was a man in his early 40s, with short, cropped brown hair, perpetually disheveled from the repeated sweeps of his hand whenever he contemplated a difficult problem. Soft lines of age were just forming at the corners of his dark eyes. He carried himself with the posture of a confident scientist, though it concealed the weight of years of pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable research into consciousness. He was waiting. The office was his, but the summons had come from Dr. Elaine Bracknell, the director of Westbridge. She was due to arrive any moment to propose a new project that, according to her brief email, might unsettle even you, Leonard. The vague phrasing intrigued him. The beep of the intercom on his desk snapped him out of his reverie. "Dr. Mortimer," came the voice of June, the administrative assistant. "Doctor, Bracknell is on her way." Len returned to his seat, trying to maintain an appearance of calm. Barely a minute passed before Dr. Elaine Bracknell stepped inside. In her late 50s, with neatly tied-back gray hair and keen, appraising eyes behind a pair of rimless glasses, She was known for her unwavering support of rigorous science, yet there was a certain energy in her step that morning, hinting at excitement. "Good morning, Leonard," she said warmly, closing the door behind her. "Elaine," Len replied, rising to greet her. "Your message was cryptic, something that might unsettle even me." Dr. Bracknell chuckled, setting down a slim dossier. "I can't say I've ever seen you flustered, so let's find out." She gestured for him to sit again, then settled into the chair opposite him. "I have a new assignment, one that might push the boundaries of our typical purview." Len folded his hands. "Try me." Elaine slid the dossier across the desk. "We've been approached by a private foundation, the Cephar Foundation. They're known for investigating so-called paranormal phenomena. We typically don't handle that kind of thing, but they've made an irresistible offer. Full funding, state-of-the-art equipment, and complete freedom to conduct the research as we see fit. No strings attached. They just want our best, most scientifically literate approach to 5 distinct phenomena." Len felt a tingle of curiosity. He opened the dossier and began skimming the short bullet points. Telepathy cases, poltergeist disturbances, apparitional sightings, ghosts, NDE-related, near-death experience, phenomenology, unidentified aerial phenomena. He arched an eyebrow. "They want us to investigate these 5 categories." "That's correct." "It's unusual," Len conceded. "Westbridge has always been about unraveling the neural and biochemical substrates of consciousness, though. Why would a paranormal foundation come to us?" Elaine leaned forward. "They specifically mentioned your name, Leonard. Apparently they want a serious, methodical approach. Someone who's not going to jump to transcendental conclusions. Someone with a physicalist track record who will look at every possible material explanation before concluding anything else." Len nodded slowly. He was, after all, known for his strict adherence to a physicalist paradigm, a stance that had caused friction with more spiritually inclined colleagues at times. "They want me to prove or disprove these phenomena under rigorous conditions." "In essence, yes," Elaine affirmed, "but they want it done fairly. They want to see if anything remains after all the physical explanations are exhausted. A remainder. In your terminology, a remainder conjecture scenario." A quiver of excitement ran through him, though he tried to remain composed. "It's not often that a well-funded group just hands us the keys and says, 'Do your worst.' I admit, it's tempting." Elaine smiled. "I thought you'd appreciate it. And you're the perfect scientist for the job. Your background in computational neuroscience, your deep knowledge of illusions and neurocognitive biases, your experience with advanced imaging. Nobody else is better suited to systematically tear these claims apart or verify something truly beyond our models." Len closed the dossier. "Then I accept." "Marvelous," Dr. Bracknell said, standing up. "I'll inform the Cephar Foundation." She hesitated briefly, as if weighing her words. "Leonard, I know your stance, but do be open-minded, at least to the possibility that not everything will fit our current models." He offered a small smile. "That's precisely the point of the remainder conjecture. If there's something beyond the physical, it will remain after all natural explanations are applied. I just haven't yet found that remainder." Elaine nodded, satisfied. "Good luck. And if you need anything, extra staff, specialized equipment, just let me know. You have carte blanche on this." When she left, Len leaned back in his chair, thinking about the enormous challenges ahead. He'd spent years analyzing claims of telepathy, hauntings, near-death experiences, and all manner of alleged paranormal events, typically finding them wanting under rigorous tests. But never before had he been given near unlimited resources to do so. It was exhilarating, and a little daunting. He thought of a line he had written in one of his early articles. "A thorough, physicalist approach is not the enemy of the spiritual quest, but its greatest ally, for only after the illusions and misinterpretations are stripped away can we see if something truly remains." Little did he know just how prescient those words would become. Chapter 2. Gathering the Team. With the CIFA Foundation's funding secured, Len found himself walking into a spacious new wing of the Westbridge facility 2 weeks later. The corridor was lined with reinforced glass windows, behind which lay pristine laboratories equipped with cutting-edge machinery, high-resolution fMRI scanners, quantum-level EEG devices, and even newly acquired magnetoencephalography (MEG) systems. Standing near the end of the corridor, waiting for him, were 3 individuals he had personally invited to join the project. Each represented a different discipline, but all shared a reputation for rigorous, no-nonsense research. Dr. Neha Chauhan, a cognitive psychologist in her mid-30s, stepped forward. Neha's background was in the psychology of belief systems and a specialty in phenomenon-based illusions. A no-frills approach, tempered by empathy, defined her style. "Dr. Mortimer," she greeted with a warm smile. "I'm excited to get started." Next was Dr. Gavin Reyes, an experimental physicist with a specialization in electromagnetic anomalies. Tall, with a perpetually serious expression and an unwavering logic to match, Gavin clasped Len's hand firmly. "Thanks for bringing me on, Len. I've been wanting to test some of these so-called paranormal claims with more sensitive instruments for a while." Finally, Dr. Antonia Tony Sarabia, a neuroscientist like Len, albeit younger and more outspoken. She'd completed her doctoral work on the neural correlates of religious experiences and was recognized for her careful separation of subjective reports from objective measurements. "Len, it's good to be here," Tony said, adjusting her glasses. "This is probably going to be the project of a lifetime." Len gestured at the labs behind the glass. "Welcome to our new domain. The Cepha Foundation has spared no expense. We have the latest iteration of near-field optical scanning systems, ultra-precise EEG, advanced sensor arrays that can record minute changes in electromagnetic fields, and even a brand new HPC cluster for big data analysis." Gavin let out a soft whistle. "This is more than I dreamed of having for my own research. I feel like we could measure the brain activity of a hummingbird in flight with these resources." Neha nodded in agreement, her eyes bright. "And the psychological labs have enough equipment to run large-scale experiments with hundreds of participants if need be. This is extraordinary." Tony's gaze swept the corridor. "So, what's our initial plan? I assume we'll handle these 5 phenomena systematically. Where do we start?" Len beckoned them into a conference room that connected to the main hallway. Inside, large monitors and an integrated telepresence system dominated the space. He pressed a control panel near the head of the table, and the monitors lit up with 5 bullet points, each corresponding to a category of alleged paranormal phenomena: telepathy, poltergeists, apparitions, NDEs, and unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP. "I suggest we approach each systematically," Len began, "but we also need to consider prioritizing them. Some categories might be more straightforward to analyze or more easily tested under lab conditions. Others might require carefully orchestrated fieldwork." Gavin studied the list. "I can see poltergeist phenomena and apparitions requiring field research. We'd likely need to go to so-called haunted sites or replicate environmental conditions in the lab. With telepathy, we can test volunteers under controlled conditions. NDEs, obviously, are trickier because they involve real medical emergencies." Neha nodded. "Yes, and near-death experiences have ethical and logistical considerations. We can't exactly induce clinical death to replicate them. We'll have to rely on existing medical data, interviews, and perhaps collaboration with hospitals that might record the real-time EEG of patients undergoing resuscitation. Maybe we can use the HPC cluster to analyze large databases of near-death reports and see if any patterns emerge." Tony tapped a pen on the table. "For telepathy, we can do classic Ganzfeld experiments or advanced versions of them. We can incorporate real-time fMRI to see if there's any synchronous neural pattern between the sender and receiver. That's definitely going to keep me busy analyzing data." Len nodded, pleased by their enthusiasm. We also have the advantage of advanced quantum sensors. Let's not forget the possibility that some alleged telepathic signals might be explained by subtle cues or electromagnetic leakage. Gavin, your physics expertise will be crucial there. Gavin cleared his throat. I do want to caution that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The typical stance is that telepathy fails under controlled conditions. But if we find a robust phenomenon that can't be explained away, that's our remainder. Len's eyes gleamed. Precisely. We fully implement every plausible naturalistic explanation first. If something then still stands as unexplainable, that's significant. Nehar looked at him curiously. Have you ever come across anything that truly stood out as unexplainable in your own past investigations? After a thoughtful pause, Len shook his head. Not definitively. Some puzzling anomalies, sure, like instrumentation glitches or borderline statistical results. But eventually, there was always a mundane explanation. I'm not closed to the possibility, but I haven't yet seen it. Tony smirked slightly. So we might get to be the first ones to push your boundaries. Len smiled back. That's the idea. You all have your tasks. We'll tackle telepathy first, as it's the easiest to study under controlled conditions. Meanwhile, we'll gather preliminary data on poltergeists and apparitions, preparing for field visits. For NDEs, we'll start liaising with local hospitals and hospice care facilities to see if we can capture real-time data on patients who are resuscitated. And, for UAP, we might need to collaborate with some external research groups that have sensor data on sightings. He stood, concluding the meeting. Let's start with what we can do in-house. Telepathy. We'll run an entire battery of experiments, and remember, we remain open-minded but skeptical, always employing the best scientific tools. If we find a remainder, so be it. It'll speak for itself. With that, the first official day of the project was underway. Unbeknownst to them all, they were about to begin a journey that would test not only the limits of technology and theory, but also their personal convictions. Chapter 3. Telepathy Trials. The telepathy experiments began with a flurry of activity. They recruited subjects from the general population, focusing on those who claimed to have psychic abilities or strong intuitive links with friends or family. The Institute had never ventured quite so far into these waters, and it generated a bit of buzz in the local community, attracting a motley array of would-be psychics. Nehar and Tony took the lead in designing the experimental protocols. They decided to run a modified Ganzfeld procedure in a soundproof lab, equipped with advanced EEG caps, MEG sensors, and even quantum interference-based detectors that Gavin had insisted on installing to measure extremely faint electromagnetic fields. One subject at a time would enter a sealed sender room, while another would be placed in a separate receiver room. The rooms were electromagnetically shielded, ensuring that no phone signals, radio waves, or other external transmissions could pass. Over a series of trials, images, sometimes emotional, sometimes neutral, were shown to the sender on a random schedule. The receiver, under mild sensory isolation, Ganzfeld approach, would describe impressions aloud. All the while, their brain activity was recorded in real time. Len circulated between the two rooms, carefully observing. He had overseen countless variations of this protocol in the past, though never with such high-tech instrumentation. From a control station behind a one-way glass partition, he watched the readouts scrolling across several monitors. Tony sat in front of a large console, tapping at the interface, marking critical time points whenever a new image was shown to the sender. Nehar, meanwhile, stood by in the receiver room to ensure everything was properly set up and that the participant was comfortable. The two rooms were connected only by a heavily shielded cable carrying data to the control station. No possibility of signals leaking from one to the other. Trial number 15, Tony announced quietly, pressing a key, showing the sender an emotional image, marking the time. On screen, a large wave of color-coded data spiked momentarily as the sender reacted to the bright, disturbing picture of a house on fire. Meanwhile, the receiver, eyes covered by gently glowing half ping-pong balls, the classic Gansfeld technique, breathed steadily under headphones playing soft pink noise. Len's gaze shifted from the real-time EEG data to the text transcript of the receiver's spoken impressions. I see something warm, like a glow, maybe candlelight or a fireplace. A small flicker of interest crossed Len's face. Candlelight or fireplace was not exactly a blazing house fire, but it could be subjectively related to warmth or flames. He knew better than to draw any conclusions from a single statement, though. They ran the protocol for each pair of subjects across multiple sessions, varying the images from emotional to neutral, from landscapes to abstract paintings. The results, after a week of trials, were collated and subjected to rigorous statistical analysis by the HPC cluster. The preliminary results came in the following Tuesday. They gathered in the main lab to review. On a large monitor, a flurry of color-coded graphs and p-values awaited. Tony summarized. We have 150 total trials across 10 subject pairs. So far, the average hit rate, meaning the receiver describing something close to the target image, is 33%. Random chance in our forced choice scenario is 25%. The difference is significant at a p-value around 0.04. Neha folded her arms. Statistically significant, but it's not huge. Could be early data anomalies or unconscious cues. Gavin leaned in. True, but we took measures to eliminate external cues. Len typed a few commands, bringing up more detailed data. The effect size is small. This might be the kind of borderline result that, with more trials, either vanishes or becomes more robust. Remember the replication crisis in psychology. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Neha nodded. Agreed. At best, this indicates we can't rule out some unknown factor. But telepathy is a strong claim. We need more data. They decided to refine the procedure further. Instead of just random images, they used a method that included decoy images in the forced choice recognition by the receiver. This new design meant the receiver wouldn't just describe what they saw, but would pick from 4 possible images, each from different emotional categories. This would reduce interpretative bias. Days turned into weeks as they carefully repeated the trials, adding new subject pairs, tweaking the protocol to eliminate any plausible explanation short of genuine telepathy. They even introduced random time delays so that the sender's image might appear up to 30 seconds after the receiver was prompted, scrambling any potential coincidences. The HPC cluster churned through the data, revealing that with each added set of trials, the effect size shrank. By the time they had 500 trials, the hit rate was hovering around 26%, well within the margin of error to be explained by random chance or subtle cues. One morning, after an all-night data analysis run, Tony rubbed her bleary eyes as she scrolled through the final readout. We're basically at chance, guys. $250,000 worth of new equipment, hundreds of hours of testing, advanced quantum detection, and nothing. If there's a signal, it's incredibly weak or non-existent. Len gave a half-smile. That's consistent with previous meta-analyses on telepathy experiments. Early small datasets sometimes show anomalies that disappear under large-scale conditions. Gavin sighed. I guess we can tentatively call telepathy explained. No remainder here, at least under these conditions. Neha, who was standing by the door, gave a small shrug. At least we can be thorough. I'm proud that we did the experiments with all possible controls. And if there's no effect, that's an important finding too. Len agreed. We'll finalize a report. But yes, no strong evidence for telepathy so far. As they packed up for the day, each felt a mix of relief and mild disappointment. They were scientists, after all, and a conclusive negative was still a finding. Yet, part of them had hoped for something that might break the mold. Little did they know that telepathy would end up being the tamest of their upcoming investigations. Chapter 4. The Haunted Laboratory. With the telepathy trials winding down, the team turned their attention to poltergeist phenomena. They had identified 3 hotspot cases reported within driving distance of Westbridge: an old Victorian house with frequent object movements, a suburban home where the owners claimed to hear unexplained knocking, and an abandoned hospital rumored to have intense poltergeist activity. Len, however, had an idea. Why don't we try a controlled environment first? If we invite people who claim to experience recurrent poltergeist phenomena, we can observe them here at the lab. We control all variables: cameras, sensors, the entire environment. If objects start flying around spontaneously, we'll capture it on every possible instrument. Nehar's eyes lit up. That's a great approach, actually. It eliminates the possibility of hidden wires or illusions in unfamiliar settings. Thus, they constructed a haunted laboratory in a disused corner of the Institute's new wing. They outfitted a large, nearly empty room with multiple cameras, including infrared, motion sensors, electromagnetic field detectors, vibration sensors under the floor, and temperature gauges. They even installed overhead LiDAR systems that could detect the position of objects in 3D space down to the millimeter. Over the next 2 weeks, they invited 5 individuals who claimed to be poltergeist magnets, each accompanied by a friend or family member who had witnessed the phenomena. The individuals spent time in the haunted lab under various conditions, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs, with or without observation. One evening, about an hour into a session, Tony's radio crackled. "Tony," came Nehar's urgent whisper, "we have movement." Tony rushed into the control room. On the monitor, she saw a live infrared feed of the subject, a middle-aged man named Arthur, standing in the center of the lab. A small object, a plastic cup, slid across a table about 5 feet from him with no apparent contact. The motion sensors confirmed no one was near it. The LiDAR data indicated a net displacement of about half a meter. "Oh my God," Tony muttered. She quickly checked for any sign of magnets, strings, or fans. Nothing. A half-meter shift in a calm environment with no gust of air was certainly intriguing. She alerted Len and Gavin, who were in the adjoining electronics lab. They hurried over, eyes locked on the playback. In the footage, the cup genuinely seemed to move on its own. "Check the electromagnetic readings," Gavin said. Tony pulled up a separate data stream. A small spike in the local electromagnetic field preceded the cup's movement by about 2 seconds. "Interesting," Gavin murmured. "Could be an anomaly in the building's wiring." Len rubbed his chin. "Or something else. Let's see if Arthur had any device on him." In real time, they watched Arthur approach the cup, wide-eyed. He touched it lightly, as if to confirm it was real, then looked around as though expecting an audience. Nehar, who had been monitoring from inside the observation corridor, stepped out to speak to the man. "Arthur, did you do anything just now? Did you feel anything unusual?" He shook his head vigorously. "No, I didn't. I was standing here thinking about my kids, and the cup just moved on its own. You saw it, right?" Nehar nodded gently. "We're just verifying our equipment. Please remain calm." They spent the next few hours scrutinizing the data. A thorough check of Arthur's clothing and body with a handheld metal detector revealed no hidden devices. The only plausible normal explanations were micro-vibrations in the floor or a gust of air, but a check of the vibration sensors showed no unusual activity, and the air pressure sensors were stable. By the end of that night, they had recorded 3 separate incidents of minor object movement. Each time, a small electromagnetic spike preceded the motion. Len decided to replicate the event with a different subject in the same environment, but over the next few days, no one else generated any unusual activity. The sensors recorded no further anomalies during that period. Nehar was impressed, but cautious. "We can't jump to a conclusion that it's poltergeist activity. Maybe Arthur's presence triggered an electromagnetic effect from a hidden device in the building. We should replicate with Arthur in a different environment, maybe a separate lab." Len agreed. "Yes, let's do that." I want to see if the same phenomenon can be repeated under more rigid conditions. Also, let's do a background check on Arthur. Is there anything in his past that suggests trickery, or is he associated with any groups that might encourage hoaxes? The background check came back clean. Arthur was a forklift operator with no known involvement in trickery or illusions. He seemed genuinely perplexed. In a new lab, with even more thorough instrumentation, they replicated the setup. Arthur arrived, looking uncertain. For 4 hours, nothing happened. Then, in the final minutes of the session, a pencil on a nearby table rolled across to the edge and fell to the floor. Once again, the sensors captured a small electromagnetic spike, followed by motion that couldn't be attributed to normal vibrations. Still, the effect was subtle. The distance moved was less than a foot, and the magnitude of the electromagnetic spike was small. But it was consistent. Tony stared at the data printouts that evening. It's so slight, Len. If we didn't have these sensitive sensors, we might chalk it up to an odd coincidence. Maybe the table was slightly tilted, but we tested for that. Len nodded, a pensive look on his face. If this is some psychokinetic phenomenon, it's at a very low threshold, or it's some unknown environmental factor that's associated with Arthur. Gavin chimed in. We might consider analyzing Arthur's personal electromagnetic field. Humans do emit small electric and magnetic fields, but typically not enough to move objects. Len turned to the others. Agreed. Let's do a thorough physiological scan of Arthur. We'll measure skin conductance, electromagnetic emission from his body, everything. It took 2 more sessions, but eventually they found something unusual. In high-resolution measurements near Arthur's extremities, there was a faint yet measurable fluctuation in the micro-Tesla range around his hands. The effect was at the limit of detection, but it correlated with the object movements. The phenomenon was neither well understood nor robust enough to replicate on demand, but it didn't appear to be a hoax. In the final meeting with Arthur, he seemed both relieved and unsettled. So, you believe me? He asked, voice trembling slightly. Len offered a reassuring nod. We believe something unusual is happening, at least in your proximity. We don't have a full explanation yet, but it seems to be a localized electromagnetic fluctuation. It may or may not be the cause of these object movements, but it's correlated. Arthur let out a shaky laugh. So I'm not crazy? Nehar gave him a compassionate smile. No, Arthur, you're not crazy, but we do need more data. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. After he left, the team huddled. On the surface, a poltergeist explanation might be sensational, but they had a possible physical correlate, an electromagnetic anomaly. Could there be a medical or neurological condition generating this? Could Arthur's skeletal or muscular system be harboring some unusual conduction properties? Or was this entire effect a bizarre coincidence? Len concluded the discussion with a measured stance. We can't claim poltergeist phenomena. We found no direct evidence of a discarnate intelligence. The best we can say is that, in Arthur's presence, we recorded minor electromagnetic fluctuations that may be strong enough to shift lightweight objects under certain conditions. We have more questions than answers, but there's still a plausible physical explanation. The rest of the team agreed, but there was a tiny glimmer in their eyes. Here, at last, was something that defied an immediate mundane explanation, though it wasn't definitively supernatural either. In the language of the Remainder Conjecture, it was an anomaly begging for deeper study. Chapter 5. Apparitions in the Field. Following the poltergeist sessions, the Institute's next order of business was apparitional sightings, ghosts in common parlance. Reports of such sightings were legion, but the challenge was to find controlled conditions or sufficiently reliable eyewitness accounts that could be investigated. Nehar compiled a short list of reputedly haunted sites, cross-referenced with the local historical society for verifiable events that might explain sightings. The leading candidate was the old Blackwood estate, a sprawling, dilapidated mansion on the outskirts of the city. Abandoned for decades, it was the subject of countless ghost stories. Local lore claimed that the original owner, a 19th-century railroad magnate, died under mysterious circumstances, and his ghost still wandered the halls. One crisp autumn evening, Len, Gavin, Nehar, and Tony arrived at Blackwood Estate with a small team of research assistants. They set up a mobile command center in a battered drawing room near the entrance, carefully placing cameras and sensors in the most active areas as reported by caretakers and curiosity seekers. The building itself was eerie enough to stir the imagination. Peeling wallpaper, creaking floorboards, a sense of emptiness broken only by the scuttling of small critters. But they were prepared. Gavin orchestrated the deployment of thermal cameras, wide-spectrum EM detectors, and even a system that could detect low-frequency sound waves, often associated with infrasound, known to cause feelings of unease and even visual hallucinations. They split into pairs. Len and Tony took the second floor. Nehar and Gavin roamed the ground floor. Each pair carried portable sensor arrays capturing temperature, electromagnetic fluctuations, and air quality. Hours passed with little of note. A few random creaks, flickering lights from unreliable electricity, and the occasional cold draft explained by broken windows. Then, at around midnight, Tony radioed from the second-floor corridor. "Len, I'm picking up an unusual cold spot in the west wing. Temperature dropped by about 10 degrees Celsius. That's more than a simple draft." Len walked over, shining his flashlight across the hallway. Sure enough, the readout on Tony's handheld sensor indicated a sharp temperature gradient between one end of the hallway and the other. He used a thermal camera to confirm that part of the corridor was significantly cooler than the rest of the building. A moment later, they heard a faint voice, almost a whisper. Both froze. "Did you hear that?" Tony whispered, heart pounding. Len nodded, flipping on his audio recorder. "Which direction did it come from?" She pointed to a closed door on the right. Carefully, they inched forward and pushed the door open. Inside was a small bedroom, stripped bare except for a battered chair near a boarded-up window. The temperature dropped even further, and Len's breath formed faint clouds in the dim beam of his flashlight. Suddenly, Tony gasped, pointing to the corner of the room. She claimed to see a faint figure, a silhouette, as if a man were standing there. Len, turning swiftly, saw nothing but a faint shimmer, which might have been a trick of the light reflecting on dust motes. Heart racing, Len snapped photos with both an infrared camera and a standard digital camera. Nothing obvious appeared in the IR images. The digital photos, upon quick review, showed only the bare corner of the room. They retreated to the corridor, more unsettled than they cared to admit. Tony checked the log from the advanced sensor array strapped to her back. "We have a mild spike in the EM field, about 3 milligauss above baseline, and the temperature data is definitely real. That's the biggest drop I've recorded tonight." Len inhaled sharply. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Cold spots can form due to certain airflow patterns in old houses, and the EM spike might be from old wiring or even the camera equipment." She nodded, but her eyes were still wide. "I know, but it felt odd. I had a sense of presence, which is common in so-called hauntings." Meanwhile, on the ground floor, Nehar and Gavin encountered a different phenomenon. While sweeping a large parlor, they heard what sounded like footsteps crossing the floor above them. Given that they knew Len and Tony were in a different part of the house, they radioed to confirm their position. Len's reply crackled. "We're in the west wing. Not moving around at the moment." Nehar and Gavin looked at each other, brows furrowed. They followed the sound to a back staircase, but as soon as they tried climbing, the footsteps stopped. When they later compared notes, they realized the footsteps seemed to be localized around the second-floor parlor, an area no one had visited that night. They placed an audio recorder there for the rest of their investigation. By 3 a.m., with adrenaline wearing off, they decided to call it a night. They packed up their gear and retreated to the Institute to analyze the trove of data they had collected. The next day, they pored over the audio recordings. To their surprise, they found faint footstep sounds in the parlor recording, at times when no one was present. But cross-referencing with the building's structural sensors revealed minute expansions and contractions in the old wood as the temperature outside changed. That could create knocking or creaking sounds, reminiscent of footsteps. As for the second-floor cold spot and Tony's sighting of a silhouette, the thermal data confirmed a real temperature drop. However, air circulation modeling in that old building revealed a partial vacuum effect near the boarded-up window, pulling cool outside air into the corridor. The shimmering effect Tony saw might have been an optical distortion caused by the flashlight beam bouncing off swirling dust in the cooler air column. Neha, presenting her psychological analysis, noted that contextual cues, the building's history, spooky atmosphere, plus the late hour, could prime the brain to interpret ambiguous stimuli as ghosts. She pointed to well-known illusions of presence that occur under stress or heightened expectation. Gavin's final statement after analyzing the EM data: "It's consistent with old, faulty wiring. On occasion, you get small surges, which align well with the distribution of wiring in the walls." Tony conceded the explanation. "It's the simplest answer, though I admit it felt real in the moment." Len summarized their findings. No conclusive evidence of an apparition at Blackwood Estate. The phenomena we recorded, footsteps, cold spots, fleeting shadows, seem to have plausible physical explanations. But let's be thorough and revisit at least one more site to replicate. They did revisit the site twice more, with less eventful nights. They also investigated 2 other alleged haunted locations, similarly capturing only ambiguous noises and fleeting illusions. Each time, the sensors pointed to natural causes, from infrasound resonance in structural beams to air currents and faulty wiring. After compiling all the data, it was difficult to claim any remainder in the apparitional category. So far, everything was pointing to mundane explanations. Yet the subjective experiences, like Tony's sense of presence, reminded them that the boundary between perception and external reality could be thinly drawn, especially in ominous contexts. Still, no smoking gun of the supernatural. Chapter 6. The Vanishing Pulse, NDE Investigations. Next on the list, near-death experiences, NDEs. This was a delicate area, both ethically and practically. They couldn't induce or replicate genuine NDEs on demand. Instead, Len secured a partnership with the local Crestwood Hospital. Through an agreement with the hospital's cardiology and emergency departments, they would have access, strictly under patient consent and IRB approval, to monitor certain patients who were at high risk of cardiac arrest. The plan was to install advanced EEG and near-infrared spectroscopy NIRS sensors in patient rooms, especially in the ICU, to record brain activity continuously. If a patient went into cardiac arrest and was resuscitated, the system would store all the relevant physiological data. Later, should the patient report an NDE, like a tunnel of light, encountering relatives, out-of-body sensation, the team could analyze the brain data during that critical window. Dr. Karen Lee, the head cardiologist at Crestwood, was initially skeptical but agreed to let them proceed as long as they didn't disrupt medical protocols or hamper patient care. Len and Tony spent weeks setting up the system with hospital technicians. They created an array of random images displayed on the ceiling monitors that were only visible from above, a potential test for out-of-body claims. If a patient claimed to have risen above their body and looked down, they might have seen those images, providing an objective check. Over several months, they collected data from dozens of code blue events. Most patients who were successfully resuscitated reported no recollection. A few gave vague impressions of dreaming or floating, but none had a veridical out-of-body perception of the hidden images. Then came an interesting case. Mrs. Harriet Donaldson, a 64-year-old who suffered a massive heart attack. She had several minutes of cardiac arrest before being revived. The next day, Harriet vividly described a classic NDE, floating above her body, seeing a bright light, and encountering deceased relatives who told her to return. She even claimed she saw the top of the monitor with some sort of greenish design. Len's ears perked up at that detail. The random image displayed on the overhead screen at the time was, in fact, a green fractal pattern. Harriet hadn't guessed the fractal exactly, but she might have glimpsed something green. Tony meticulously went over the EEG data from Harriet's room. Interestingly, there was a faint burst of gamma wave activity about 10 seconds after the official time of Harriet's cardiac arrest. This was puzzling. One would expect near flatline EEG in a state of cardiac arrest, though minimal neural activity can persist for a short window. Curious, Len dug deeper. Harriet's heart had stopped beating for nearly 3 minutes, yet the sensor logs showed a brief revival of cortical activity for around 5 seconds in that window. "I've read about this phenomenon before," Tony said, referencing a recent study. "There's a hypothesis that when oxygen and blood flow plummet, there's sometimes a final surge of synchronous gamma activity in the brain, possibly a last-ditch attempt to reboot." Neha, reviewing Harriet's interview, noted that Harriet only vaguely described the hidden image. She said it was greenish, but she didn't mention fractals or shapes. Could be lucky guesswork. Green is a common color for hospital equipment or screens. Len nodded. Yes, that's the likely explanation. Still, the data about her brain spike is fascinating. It suggests that her conscious experience could have been formed during those brief seconds of revived neuronal synchronization, albeit below normal detection thresholds. Harriet's case made minor waves at the Institute. She was the first to even partially identify an overhead clue, yet it wasn't definitive. The partial success might be chalked up to chance or a half-formed memory of a nurse's outfit or the reflection off another screen. As more months passed, they gathered data from multiple patients. A handful reported classic NDEs. None provided accurate descriptions of hidden images, though sometimes they approximated colors or shapes. In each case, the EEG analysis found small bursts of cortical activity during or just after the period of clinical flatline, consistent with the last surge hypothesis. In a summary meeting, Len laid out the stats. Out of 30 recorded resuscitations, 6 reported some kind of NDE. Of those, 3 claimed to see something above or beyond their physical body, but none accurately identified the hidden images. EEG data often showed a minimal wave surge, possibly linked to their reported experiences. He concluded, the data strongly suggests these experiences might be generated by residual or rebooting brain activity. I see no definitive sign of disembodied consciousness or information gleaned from outside the physical vantage point. Tony agreed, though she highlighted that the subjective power of NDEs shouldn't be underestimated. These experiences feel profound and life-changing to the survivors. Neha nodded sympathetically. Yes, and for them, it can be transformative. But scientifically, we have no evidence that it's anything beyond a last flicker of brain function. Gavin chimed in. So once again, no remainder. If anything, the NDE phenomenon is consistent with a diminishing but still operative neural substrate. Len exhaled. Precisely. It's an elegant explanation. We still can't be certain about the entire subjective dimension, but we have no reason to suspect anything supernatural. With that, they checked off NDEs. The remainder conjecture had once again pointed them toward a plausible material explanation. Chapter 7. Skies Unknown, the UAP Challenge. The final category, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, UAP, posed a different kind of challenge. It was less about personal experience, though sightings are often anecdotal, and more about analyzing radar data, photographic evidence, and sometimes sensor logs from government or civilian agencies. The team discovered that the CIFA Foundation had arranged for them to collaborate with a small aerospace firm that specialized in advanced radar systems. Through non-disclosure agreements, They gained access to logs of unusual objects tracked by radar over the past few years. Most turned out to be experimental aircraft, drones, or atmospheric anomalies. But there were a few cases that defied immediate explanation. Objects accelerating at speeds or angles beyond conventional propulsion methods. Gavin, with his physics background, pored over the data. Often, he found that sensor glitches, temperature inversions, or angular illusions could account for the bizarre kinematics. However, one radar track from a year ago in the southwestern desert remained puzzling. The data indicated an object traveling at Mach 5, then abruptly stopping mid-air, reversing direction at an impossible rate of acceleration. The timestamps and altitudes seemed consistent. The radar system that captured it was double redundant, reducing the chance of a glitch. "Len, I can't definitively explain this one," Gavin admitted, eyes glued to the lines of data. "It seems physically impossible under our known technology." Len looked at the readout. The altimetry data confirmed the object changed altitude from 40,000 feet to near sea level in under 10 seconds, far beyond typical aircraft or ballistic capabilities. They arranged an interview with the radar operator who witnessed the track. He insisted it wasn't a software bug. "I've seen everything from stealth fighters to meteorites," the operator said. "But this was different. The system was triple-checked." Nehar suggested they look for confounding factors. Could it be multiple objects mistaken for one? A glitch in the timestamp? Gavin's analysis eventually suggested a potential explanation: sporadic ducting in the radar beam that might reflect signals from different points, creating a composite track that looked like a single object performing impossible maneuvers. It was a known but rare atmospheric phenomenon, yet he couldn't be certain. Meanwhile, the team also evaluated a handful of alleged photographic or video evidence of UAPs. As usual, most turned out to be misidentified birds, drones, lens flares, or illusions. One video, though, captured an orb of light hovering silently, then zipping away at incredible speed. When Len and Tony subjected the frames to digital analysis, they found no evidence of tampering. But the resolution was poor, and distance estimations were uncertain. A small insect close to the lens could appear as a distant, fast object if out of focus. Ultimately, while certain UAP data points appeared genuinely puzzling, they hadn't discovered anything that definitively demanded a non-human or otherworldly explanation. The probability favored either advanced technology or sensor anomalies, mysteries that might yield to further conventional analysis. By now, the team had systematically tackled 4 categories: telepathy, poltergeists, apparitions, NDEs, and UAP. Each time, they found plausible natural explanations or inconclusive data. Nothing unambiguously pointed to a paranormal or transcendental phenomenon. Len felt both vindicated and somewhat deflated. It was the old story: extraordinary claims, but no extraordinary evidence. "I guess we should file the final reports," he told the group one afternoon. "We've done what we set out to do: test these phenomena under rigorous conditions. So far, no remainder." Tony, though, was absent-mindedly tapping her pen on a folder. "Len, not to second guess, but we do have that small poltergeist anomaly with Arthur, the electromagnetic fluctuations. We never fully explained it." Nehar nodded. "He's right. We never pinned that down. But it was so subtle." Len shrugged. "We can't replicate it consistently. It's interesting, but incomplete." Gavin chimed in. "Maybe we should do a few more sessions with Arthur before we finalize anything, just to be thorough." Len agreed. "Sure, let's invite him back." That decision would mark the beginning of the project's most shocking turn. Chapter 8. Revisiting the Poltergeist Enigma. Arthur returned a week later, appearing both anxious and hopeful. Nehar and Tony greeted him warmly, ushering him into a newly reconfigured Psychophysiology Lab 3. This time, they had gone all out. An array of micro-motion cameras that could detect movements less than a millimeter, advanced electromagnetic sensors, and magnetometers to record any faint field changes around him. They planned a series of structured tasks, asking Arthur to concentrate on moving specific objects, to read or watch calm videos, and to engage in conversation. All the while, the environment would be carefully monitored. For the first hour, nothing happened. Arthur sat in a chair, occasionally glancing at the objects: a pencil, a plastic cup, a small metal ball on a nearby table. His pulse was normal, his EEG baseline, no unusual electromagnetic readings. "Arthur, can you tell us if you feel anything before an object moves?" Neha asked gently. He shook his head. "Number. Honestly, it just happens randomly. I have no sense of doing anything." Len watched from behind the control room glass, scanning the data readouts. His expression was relaxed, convinced that they might see nothing at all, or maybe the same minimal anomalies. Suddenly, the magnetometer graph spiked. Tony jerked upright. "Something's happening," she exclaimed, pointing at the data. On the live video feed, the small metal ball on the table trembled for a moment, then shot off the edge as if flicked by an invisible finger. It clattered to the floor. "Did everyone see that?" Gavin blurted, half stunned. Neha rushed into the lab. Arthur was just as shocked, standing with arms raised. "I didn't touch it. It just flew." This was more dramatic than the previous subtle movements they'd witnessed. Len hurried in with a handheld sensor to check the immediate environment. The magnetometer reading showed an intense localized spike near the table, more than triple what they had seen before. They repeated the tests for another hour, half expecting a hoax or hidden device, but thorough scanning of Arthur's clothing revealed nothing. Finally, just as they were about to call it a day, the pencil hopped an inch into the air and rolled off the table. A wave of goosebumps rippled across the team. Tony scratched her head. "This is insane. We have real-time data on a localized magnetic field spike correlated with the object's motion." Len's mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. Could it be that Arthur's body was generating short bursts of an intense magnetic field? But how? Biological systems rarely produce strong magnetic fields, aside from the faint ones detectable in magnetoencephalography. They decided to keep Arthur overnight for more comprehensive testing with his consent. They set him up with a special mattress in a shielded room, hooking him up to EEG, ECG, and a magnetometer array. Neha and Tony stayed as well, rotating shifts to monitor data. At around 3 a.m., Neha was reviewing the live feed when she witnessed something chilling. Arthur's entire body convulsed for a second, like a brief seizure, and an intense magnetic surge lit up the monitors. Simultaneously, a metal tray near the far wall slammed against the opposite wall, as if flung with force. Shouting, Neha sprinted into the room. She found Arthur wide awake, trembling, eyes terrified. I felt something moving through me," he gasped. She checked for injuries. Arthur's vitals were elevated, but he was conscious and coherent. There were no immediate signs of a typical epileptic event. When Len and Tony arrived, they saw the tray lying on the floor, at least 8 feet from its original location. The sensors confirmed a massive electromagnetic pulse. "You can't fake that," Tony whispered, her face pale. Len, sweaty palms clutched around a digital tablet, mumbled, "This is unprecedented." They spent the next several days performing every test they could think of. MRI scans, blood tests, advanced metabolic panels. Nothing was abnormal. Arthur's brain structure was normal, no metal implants. His blood chemistry was unremarkable. Yet, in random bursts, localized magnetic surges emanated from his body, sometimes strong enough to move small metallic objects. Even Gavin was at a loss. "If I didn't see the data with my own eyes, I'd say it's impossible. But we're measuring up to 0.1 Tesla in these spikes, like a small MRI coil. That's huge." The phenomenon was intermittent and seemed outside Arthur's conscious control. The team hypothesized it might be caused by an unknown physiological process, Perhaps a novel bioelectromagnetic phenomenon. Or it could be some synergy with a hidden environmental factor. But try as they might, they couldn't identify any external source. Rumors began swirling around the institute. A few staffers whispered about poltergeists or demonic possession. But Dr. Mortimer was adamant. Let's not jump to the transcendental. There must be a physical explanation. We just haven't found it. As word leaked out, the Cepher Foundation's liaison, Ms. Graves, arrived unexpectedly. She was a composed, professional woman who insisted on observing the phenomenon herself. After seeing a demonstration where Arthur accidentally sent a metal ruler sailing across the lab, Ms. Graves nodded solemnly. "This is precisely why we funded this initiative, Dr. Mortimer. This might be the breakthrough." Len's voice was calm but tight with tension. "We're still exploring natural explanations, Ms. Graves. It's remarkable, yes, but not necessarily supernatural." She gave him an enigmatic smile. "Of course, but we look forward to your final conclusions." That left the team in a quandary. If there was a purely physical explanation, it evaded their considerable expertise and instrumentation. Yet the phenomenon was too real and reproducible, albeit sporadically, to dismiss. Chapter 9. A Most Startling Remainder. They decided to press further. Over the next week, they performed a battery of experiments aimed at isolating the source of Arthur's electromagnetic emissions. They tried placing him in a double-layered mu-metal chamber designed to block external magnetic fields. The phenomenon persisted. Objects inside the chamber moved, instruments recorded intense pulses. Finally, Tony rigged a specialized helmet with superconducting quantum interference devices, SQUIDs, to measure Arthur's brain activity more precisely. As they asked him to concentrate or relax, they monitored his cortical fields in real time. Then, in a surprising twist, during a routine Q&A session about his life history, Arthur confessed something. "I used to have these strange migraines as a teenager, where I'd see flashes of light. And once, I was struck by lightning when I was 20. It knocked me unconscious, but the doctor said I was lucky to be alive." A few minutes later, the phenomenon manifested again. A small steel clip flew off the cart near Arthur's bed. Simultaneously, the squid helmet recorded an intense, coherent burst of oscillatory activity in Arthur's parietal lobes, far stronger than any typical brainwave. Gavin nearly dropped his notepad. I've never seen such strong field strength from a living human brain. It's borderline on what we'd measure in a research magnet." The data implied that Arthur's neural tissue was, in extremely brief bursts, generating a powerful magnetic field, somehow. The mechanism was a mystery. Len's expression was solemn as they reviewed the recordings. "We have to consider that we've stumbled upon a genuinely unknown biological phenomenon, a new type of neural conduction. Or we have to admit that something else might be at play." Neha, who had always championed rational explanations, looked surprisingly shaken. "Len, this is beyond anything we know. We can't replicate these magnetic bursts in other individuals, and it defies known physiology." Arthur's episodes increased in frequency over the next few days, and each time the data confirmed the same pattern. An inexplicable generation of a localized magnetic field from his parietal lobe region, culminating in the movement of nearby metallic objects. Meanwhile, Ms. Graves from the Cepher Foundation kept pressing for a conclusion. Len felt the pressure mounting. One evening, as the team worked late, Arthur began convulsing more severely. Sensing an emergency, they rushed him to the advanced medical suite. His body temperature soared, and his EEG recorded chaotic patterns. Without warning, the lights flickered. Sparks flew from an overhead lamp, as if short-circuited. Nearby computers went haywire, screens blinking. A powerful wave of magnetism rippled through the room, slamming metal instruments against the walls. Everyone dove for cover. When it subsided, Arthur lay unconscious on the floor, the squid helmet half broken beside him. They scrambled to check his vitals. Heartbeat was erratic. paramedics arrived and stabilized him, taking him to the Institute's infirmary. For hours, doctors struggled to keep his heart rate steady. Then, at around 3 a.m., he opened his eyes, looked at Len, and whispered, "I can't hold it back anymore," before seizing again. In that final, violent convulsion, a surge of electromagnetic force knocked out the building's power. By the time emergency generators kicked in, Arthur's vitals had flatlined. Despite frantic attempts at resuscitation, he was gone. The medical exam found no direct cause of death besides cardiac arrest. An autopsy revealed no anomalies except for microscopic scarring in the brain's parietal region, possibly from the lightning strike years ago or from repeated subclinical seizures. In the days after, the battered instruments were repaired. The data, though incomplete, told a disturbing story. Arthur's last wave had been measured at over 1 Tesla at its peak, enough to degrade some of the electronic memory in the lab. Shaken, the team convened for a final analysis. Len, pale and exhausted, addressed them. "We have evidence that Arthur's brain generated intermittent magnetic fields far beyond known biological capabilities. We never found a conventional explanation. All we can propose is that, due to his lightning strike and unique neural scarring, he developed an unprecedented electromagnetic synergy, something we can't replicate or explain with current science." Neha dabbed tears from her eyes. "He died under our watch. He was a living anomaly." Gavin's voice trembled. "This might be that remainder, the one phenomenon that truly defies our physicalist assumptions." Len swallowed hard. "I'm not sure if it's supernatural or if it's just a frontier of biology and physics. But I have to concede we cannot currently reduce it to any known physical mechanism." Tony looked at them with haunted eyes. "So we have no choice but to report an unexplainable remainder." Len closed his eyes, nodding slowly. This was the last thing he had ever expected, to find something genuinely beyond their ability to explain. Chapter 10. The Shocking Conclusion. In the weeks following Arthur's death, the mood at Westbridge Institute was somber. The team wrote up their findings with uncharacteristic caution. As per the CIFA Foundation's contract, the final report addressed all 5 categories of phenomena. Telepathy, no convincing evidence beyond statistical noise. Apparitions, all alleged hauntings explained by atmospheric or psychological factors. NDEs, likely rooted in transient brain activity during or shortly after cardiac arrest. UAP, mostly sensor anomalies or advanced technology, nothing conclusively extraterrestrial or supernatural. Poltergeist, specifically Arthur's case. Unexplained. They included the data logs, sensor readings, and the autopsy report. Despite the heartbreak, it was a landmark document, unprecedented in thoroughness and instrumentation. The highlight was the poltergeist phenomenon that turned out to be a sporadic generation of extremely powerful electromagnetic fields from Arthur's parietal cortex. Ms. Graves returned to receive the final briefing. Len, speaking for the team, read from the executive summary. After exhaustive investigation and the elimination of all plausible mundane factors, we must conclude that the cause of the poltergeist-like effects observed with subject A, Arthur, remains unexplained by current scientific knowledge. We categorize it as a genuine remainder phenomenon, consistent with the remainder conjecture. Whether it proves to be a newly discovered biological mechanism or points to something beyond physical explanations cannot be resolved with our current technological and theoretical framework. Ms. Graves listened intently, then slowly closed her copy of the report. "Thank you, Doctor. Mortimer, this is precisely what the Foundation hoped for, clarity on the many claims of the paranormal, and in this one case, a phenomenon that stands as a genuine mystery." Len's hands trembled on the table. "I always believed a thorough materialist approach was the best route. I still do. Yet it's led us here, to an impasse." Neha spoke up. "But it's not necessarily mystical. Perhaps future advancements will reveal a physical explanation for what happened to Arthur." Ms. Graves inclined her head. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is something that transcends conventional science. Either way, your approach was commendable. You exhausted every possibility, and now you can only conclude that it's beyond your current scope. Gavin, eyes distant, quoted softly, "If something is genuinely beyond science's reach, it will invariably show up as a remainder." He turned to Len. "You said that once, and here we are." Tony added, voice wavering, "I feel sorrow for Arthur, but also, we've glimpsed something extraordinary." Len concluded with a heavy sigh. "For me, this changes nothing and everything. I remain a physicalist, but I'm forced to accept that this phenomenon is beyond our present understanding. It might be more instructive about consciousness than any of our prior experiments. If we truly can't reduce it to known physics, it may well be pointing to a domain we've never charted." In the days that followed, Ms. Graves quietly arranged for the poltergeist data to be secured. The Cepher Foundation's final statement praised the team's rigor and transparency. Meanwhile, a hushed sense of awe settled over Westbridge. Word leaked of a magnetic poltergeist phenomenon that could not be explained away, something that might one day rewrite textbooks on consciousness and physics. Len Mortimer resumed his usual research into computational neuroscience, but forever changed. In his personal journal, he wrote, "Sometimes, the materialist approach leads to the brink of an epistemological cul-de-sac, revealing that which cannot, yet, be explained away. Arthur's case might be one such remainder. I do not know if it points to a spiritual dimension or an undiscovered realm of physics, but it is a reminder of why we do science at all, to push boundaries until the boundary pushes back. If there is indeed something beyond our rationalist inspections, ironically, it is the physicalist agenda that will ultimately escort us there, ensuring we do not jump to transcendental temptations prematurely. And if, somewhere, someday, we can finally explain Arthur's phenomenon, then we will have advanced our science even further. In either outcome, truth wins." And so the final shock was this. The Remainder Conjecture, once a philosophical footnote, became a central theme of the Institute's future endeavors. For in the deepest pursuit of the naturalistic, they stumbled upon a mystery that defied all known laws, forcing even the most steadfast materialists to admit that there may yet be domains beyond their grasp, realms where consciousness and physics intertwine in ways that no existing theory can fully capture.
By God, great Caesar's ghost.